something. Maybe that's why people get drunk on New Year's Eve, to forget it. It's sad to think that a whole year is over. But if you think New Year's is depressing, how would you feel if you thought that all life on this planet was ending soon? 3 million years of human history erased forever. Sad, isn't it? Chris Hayes thinks so. Chris Hayes is what every man would be if feminists ever achieved absolute power in this country. Apologetic, bespectacled, and deeply, deeply concerned about global warming and the patriarchal systems that cause it. On Friday, Hayes hosted a town hall event on MSNBC with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It was designed to promote her Green New Deal. This apparently seemed like a wise idea to executives over at NBC. The very same news outlet that spent 2 years lying to you about Russia brings you a 29-year-old former bartender to teach you about science. Hayes framed the terms at the outset of the show. Unless you do exactly what Dr. Ocasio-Cortez says, the entire human race has only 12 years to live.
What we have to do to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change is to cut emissions in half in 12 years. 12 years. That's the project we've been tasked with by the Earth. Has come a bold new policy proposal that might be the most controversial thing in American politics at the moment, and you've probably heard about it. It's called the Green New Deal. Some people call it a socialist monster. Some people call it our only hope for survival here in the way of life that we hold dear.
It looks like Ellen, kind of a fusion show. But did you hear what he said? Our only hope for survival. Holy smokes, that is terrifying. Help us, Chris Hayes. Where is this life raft, this humanity-saving antidote that alone can prevent the death of our children? Well, the good news is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has the cure for human extinction. All we have to do is obey her and be very, very good people.
In my framework, in my belief, that we not just have a wealthy society, but that we have a moral society.
Wait a second, you may be wondering. How does a member of Congress who hasn't yet turned 30, someone who's never even raised children, get the right to lecture me about morality? Well, that's the difference between you and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is a highly decent person. Listen to her explain how she doesn't resort to ad hominem attacks, unlike her enemies, who, by the way, are xenophobic white supremacists.
We're actually talking about something substantive. We're not calling anyone names. People say Tea Party of the left, and I find this phrase very interesting, this phrasing very interesting, because the grounding of the Tea Party was xenophobia, the underpinnings of white supremacy.
Yeah, stop with the name calling, you racist, white supremacist xenophobe. So it's official. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a moron and nasty and more self-righteous than any televangelist who ever preached a sermon on cable access. She's not impressive. She's awful. So how did she get so famous? Why do people like her? Well, if we're being honest, we got to say it's because not everything she says is wrong. Listen to this clip. It's from the same town hall. Ocasio-Cortez takes a break from her idiotic climate theology to offer what turns out to be a fairly insightful critique of the American economy.
We have runaway income inequality. We are at one of our most unequal points, economically speaking, in American history. We are dealing with a crisis of how our economy is even made up. Our economy is increasingly financialized, which means we are making profits off of interest, off of leasing your phone, off of doing all of these things, but we aren't producing and we aren't innovating in the way that we need to as an economy.
Okay, you hate to admit it, given the source, but try to ignore the way she said it. Maybe just print it out and read it. A lot of it's basically true. Neither party wants to talk about this. The Republicans are in fetal position. They just don't want to be unpopular anymore. They'll do anything not to be unpopular. The Democrats want what they've always wanted, total and complete control over you and this country. Neither party will say that our economy, at its core, is badly distorted. Any economy based on interest payments isn't really an economy, it's a scam. Healthy countries innovate. They make things. They don't treat people like interchangeable widgets. They don't worship finance. In a healthy country, bankers aren't heroes. Private equity is not the highest paid profession. Nobody brags about working at a hedge fund. In America right now, we have the opposite, unfortunately. And that's why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a constituency. Not because she's impressive, she's not, but because she's one of the very few people who will say the obvious about growing corporate tyranny in this country. That doesn't mean she's right about anything else. Taking power from the banks and giving it to Ocasio-Cortez, as she proposes, would not solve our problems. It'll just put an even dumber person in charge. But she's right about the financialization part.
In just a second. So the president then started to get into the details. He started talking about the Green New Deal. The best boon that Trump has ever received is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. AOC is the id of the Democratic Party in the same way that Trump is the id of the Republican Party. AOC and her agenda are nuts. So nuts, she didn't get a single vote in favor of a Green New Deal bill co-sponsored by 12 separate senators on the Democratic side of the aisle. Not one of the co-sponsors of the bill voted for the bill. They all voted present on their own bill.
You either take private insurance away from those 170 million Americans or greatly restrict access to it, meaning there is no relief valve for physicians facing up to 40% payment cuts. This would decimate physician networks, creating a permanent physician shortage, and it would leave medical students with no hope of paying off their loans. And the cost of Medicare for All has been projected to be as high as $32 trillion. That's trillion with a T. Basically, if implemented by 2022, Medicare for All would mean that healthcare spending would take up 58% of federal spending, compared to 28% today. It's fiscally unsustainable. But to make matters worse, it would destroy Medicare for the seniors who have spent their whole life paying into it. A promise made to those who paid for it would become an entitlement for all, destroying an important program for those it was intended for. Medical innovation would take a back seat, and we would give up our status as the world's leader in medical innovation. Imagine placing every American under a system where an act of Congress is required to add benefits or to make routine changes. Healthcare is changing rapidly, and we need to have a system that is nimble to respond to it. The reason people are calling for Medicare for All is not because the ACA has worked in remedying what ails our system, because it has not. But their solution is literally to do more of what's not working. It's like the man who has a pounding headache, who then takes a hammer to his head to make it go away.
Terry Ross, thank you for coming in and offering your testimony today. Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, mentioned by my colleague, was noted by the New York Times as laboring long and hard in his career, notably in the areas of voter suppression and nativism. He stated last year that he encouraged President Trump to add a question about citizenship to the census during the early weeks of Trump's presidency. Kobach said, quote, "I raised the issue with the president shortly after he was inaugurated, and, quote, he was absolutely interested in this." Shortly thereafter, in April of 2017, Steve Bannon asked you to speak to Mr. Kobach about his, quote, ideas about including a citizenship question on the 2020 decennial census. Did you speak to Mr. Kobach about his ideas on the citizenship question?
As I described earlier in my testimony, Chris Kobach did have a conversation with me early on in my...
So you did...
I'm sorry, I'm not finished. Chris Kobach did have a conversation with me. He said he had a question he would like us to ask.
Thank you. And I thought here, I'm sorry, I must reclaim my time. Mr. Kobach later sent an email to you on July 14th, writing that the lack of the citizenship question, quote, leads to the problem that aliens who do not actually reside in the United States are still counted for congressional apportionment services. Of course, they do reside in the United States. They reside in my district. They're my constituents. But he then wrote, quote, "It is essential that one simple question be added to the upcoming 2020 census. It's all there in black and white." Kobach is clear about his reason for adding the citizenship question in his correspondence to you. and it has nothing to do with the DOJ. It has nothing to do with the Voting Rights Act. It is about congressional apportionment to immigrants. But following that email and its concerning contents, did you cut off all contact with Mr. Kobach, or did you speak with him again?
I have no recollection of speaking with him again after that.
Well, we do have the Southern District of New York has identified a July 25th call between you and Mr. Kobach after that email. Did you bring up Mr. Kobach or his ideas about the citizenship question with anyone in the Commerce Department after Kobach's email?
I ultimately rejected the question that Kobach wanted asked.
So it does say here, Judge Furman in the Southern District of New York wrote that you, in fact, mentioned Kobach again in a September 6th meeting, in a September 6th, 2017 meeting on the citizenship question. In fact, it was so concerning to your own staff that the General Counsel expressed, quote, concern about your contact with Kobach and recommended talking to others first. Do you recall anything about that meeting?
No, I don't. If you have a document, if you have a document, I'll be glad to look at it.
I'd be happy to share that. And additionally, do you think it would be helpful for us to speak with Mr. Kobach about this matter?
I have no idea. The committee has to make its own decisions.
All right. One other thing, it's been stated multiple times in this hearing that the question is a reinstatement of a previous question. But the last time a citizenship question specifically around citizenship was discussed on the census was in 1950. And I pulled up the old question here. And I know it's tough to see from far away, but I pulled up the old question that was originally on the census in 1950. And I see here that the question that is being proposed for 2020 is quite materially different. So it is not a reinstatement. It is not to placing again or a restoration of the original question. It is a materially different question. Now, the U.S. Census Act of 1974 requires that if the Secretary finds such a change necessary, they must send a report to Congress on the proposed change when the question is proposed, not when it is decided upon. Was that legally required report to Congress submitted to us?
I can't respond to your question about the two documents you held up unless you show them to me. I don't have them.
I did not ask a question about